One of the best things about photography is being able to capture the diversity of nature and wildlife all around us. We are lucky and privileged enough to live in this incredible world, and as well as enjoying nature, it is also our duty to conserve it and to protect it. And photography is one of the very best tools that we can use to do that. There is such a huge biodiversity that we live in. It's a joy to be able to interact and experience with. And we want to be able to preserve this world and ensure its longevity through the use of our photography, and of course to also document very special members of our families. My name is William Eames. Welcome back to the Smartphone Photography course. Welcome to lesson number 3. Now, at this stage, I think we can forego the housekeeping. I'm sure you could all recite it back to me at vertebrum because we've gone through it so many times. So we can get straight on into this lesson, which is great because we have a huge amount to cover within this lesson. So, just a couple of things we're going to go over through this lesson. We're going to talk all about preparation when it comes to photographing nature, photographing wildlife. There is some preparation that we need to do to ensure that we're not getting out there and wasting our time, but also that we're also minimizing our impact, I suppose, in the environment as well. We'll talk about geotagging. We'll have a look at some more advanced equipment that you can use when it comes to photographing wildlife. Speak a little bit about animal behaviors, again, so that you know when to go out and to photograph. And then later on in the lesson, we're going to have a look at macro wildlife. So we're going to talk all about macro photography, macro ratios, and focus stacking as well. So a huge amount to cover in this lesson, but we'll kick things off on a fairly straightforward topic on how to photograph pets. Now, there's no special equipment or anything that you need when it comes to photographing pets or anything like that. So anybody can do this. And I suppose if I was to recommend any type of one equipment, a wide angle lens tends to be preferable when photographing animals because they tend to move around a lot. So it can be tricky if you're trying to use a telephoto lens. But let's have a look at some basic steps that you can take to help get better photographs of your pets. Starting off with getting down to their level and focusing on the eyes. So these are the two things that you should keep in mind when you're photographing pets is always try to get down to their level. And like this is something we spoke about back in module 1 when we were talking about photographing children as well. You want to try and see the world from their perspective, and it also helps to make more of a connection as well. So get down low, get down to their level. It'll make them feel a little bit more comfortable as well, and you'll get a much better photograph. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you can't always photograph them from above as well, because that will also give a different type of perspective. To the shot can be also a very fun perspective if you happen to be using something like a fisheye lens as well. But if you want to make more of a connection, you should get down to their level. And as I said, with any type of portrait, you should always be aiming to focus on the eyes, because that's where we make our connections. Use natural light as well. Window light is great for this, especially when it comes to like this, photographing cats, as they typically will go to the warmest part of the house, which is usually where the light is coming in. But use natural light, utilize the natural light in your house. Adding artificial light, or like using a flash, first of all, it can scare animals, but it also it doesn't, I suppose, convey the fact that these are animals, and you're adding something artificial into the shot. So use natural light when you can, and as I said, window light is an absolutely great one for this. Use props, use toys in the photograph, maybe to get their attention, or just have them interact with toys, or for example, like this little hamsters or gerbils, anything like that. Smaller animals, you might have them interacting in things within their environment, within their cages, or if you have them kind of running around the house, or in one of those little kind of balls and so on, they're really really cool. You might photograph them inside that as well. So use props to add a little bit more and a little playfulness into the photograph, and let them just kind of go mad and have fun with those props as well, because you'll get much more candid types of photos. Simple and plain backgrounds work much better as well. Again, like any type of portrait you're taking, whether it's people or whether it is animals and that, you should try to have the background as free as much as possible from any type of distractions. You could have a plain wall, like in this one, just a plain kind of grey wall in the background, or you want to have the background kind of falling off, a bit of distance between your subject and the background, which will also help you to get that kind of shallow depth of field effect. But remember, your focus here is on your subject, which is going to be your pet. So just the same way that when you're photographing animals, you definitely want to try and keep things nice and focused and tight by having a plain background. That's such a great photograph. I just have to laugh at it. His face is great. And get a selfie as well, of course. Get in on the action too. Pets are probably going to respond a lot better. At least dogs are going to respond a lot better. If you're kind of making a big deal about it and getting into the shot too, they're probably going to be like, what's going on? I want to be part of this too. So get in there with them, and get a selfie, of course, with them as well. And again, you're going to just kind of get that bond across. You're going to get that interaction across as well. And of course, it'll make a great memory for you in the years going forward too. Now, some animals are tricky to capture, like cats. They're I'd speak from experience. They're generally not going to want to sit there and pose for you. So you might use sound and noise to get their attention, or you might use treats. Now, of course, that's entirely up to you if you want to use treats or not. Some people avoid using treats because they don't want to overfeed their pets. Your pet might be on a diet or something at the moment, so that's an entirely up to you. But of course, if you're with cats, you might have something on a stick to kind of distract them. Use your keys to create a kind of jingle jangle, to get their attention and to get photographs. So do experiment with noise as well. If you're having issue capturing the shot, like, and this is a great example. This cat is clearly being their attention is clearly drawn on something that the photographer is doing, or someone close by to the photographer is doing. And practice patience. So obviously animals are not going to be able to you're not going to be able to communicate with them very effectively, so you just have to take your time with them. Just let them be, let them do their things, and get the shots. Just keep snapping away until you get photographs that you are happy with. So just take your time with them, and I mean, you're going to have, that's the most fun part of it anyway, is spending time with them anyhow. And the more time that you spend with them, and the more time that you've got your phone out with them, you're photographing, the more relaxed they are going to get with it, and it'll just become something that they don't even notice anymore, so that you can get better photographs. And perhaps most importantly, just let them be themselves. Don't try to force them into posing. Don't try to make them do something that they don't feel comfortable doing, and just let them go wild. This is an issue when you're going to get the best photographs. And while you might be a bit annoyed if your dog is running through the mud and then that's going to drag it through the house and so on, you're going to look back at these photographs in years to come, and you're going to feel very, very differently about those particular photographs, because you're capturing them when they're at their happiest, when they're just absolutely just full of joy and just living their best lives. So let them be themselves, and great photographs will come from that. So, did you know that this photograph was captured on a smartphone? It's a spectacular macro photograph here. Great shallow depth of field here, and great bokeh in the background here as well. And this was captured on a smartphone. So don't let anybody ever tell you that's not possible to get great photographs, DSLR like quality photographs on your smartphone? It absolutely is, and this type of shot is proof of that. This was taken by an Indian photographer, Sashi Kumar, 20-year-old university student. Does photography as a hobby and particularly into his macro photography. Now, he does have two very high quality phones. He's got the OnePlus 6T, good specs on that there in terms of the megapixels, and he's also got a Redmi Note 3 as well, and he uses various macro lenses to capture these shots as well. You can check out on Petapixel, which is a site you should definitely be following, petapixel.com. You can find out much more about him and see much more of his shots. And I just wanted to show him because he's great example that you don't need to have really high-end DSLR macro lenses and so on to get great macro photographs. Now we'll be having a look at macro a little bit later on in this lesson, but let's get on to our next topic, which is all about wildlife photography. Now, there are going to be some basic equipment that you're going to need when it comes to wildlife photography, but it will also be very much determined by what type of wildlife photography you want to do. But preparation is absolutely key. So when it comes to wildlife photography, preparation is what's going to lead to successful photographs. Okay, it's going to maximize your time. It's going to maximize the quality of the shots that you get. If you go out without any preparation, you're likely to get frustrated because you're not going to capture animals. You could end up going out on a day with bad weather, and so on. So you really need to do your preparation first of all, to maximize your success. Now, I mean, with preparation, that does also mean that you go out on those days where the weather is perhaps not as good, as overcast, because it'll still be practice. It'll still be good for you to get familiar with the area that you're thinking about photographing and the animals that you're thinking about photographing. So do use those days as well. Be ready for anything that nature throws at you. So you want to make sure you're wearing the appropriate gear as well, that you're not going out in just a t-shirt and shorts and then suddenly it starts getting really windy and cold and lashing rain. So you want to make sure that you're appropriately dressed, or that if you are going somewhere that requires a bit of hiking, that you've also got food and water and everything there with you as well to make sure that you're safe too. You also want to be well prepared so that you're causing minimal disturbance to nature. So the places that you're thinking about photographing, that you're in and out of there as quickly as possible, so that you're not disturbing the wildlife. You're not disturbing nature. You're having as at least a minimal amount of impact in that area as possible. Now, one of the things you're definitely going to need is a telephoto lens, a telephoto lens attachment. Now, you may have a telephoto lens already built into your camera, again, depending on the type of camera that you're using, but I would recommend anything that goes within the 5 to 20x range, which would be in and around 24 to 400 millimeter equivalent. As we've mentioned before, great for sports, portraits and stuff, but in this case, we're going to be looking at wildlife. Some will have a zoom option, meaning that you can zoom in and out with them, so you're not just fixed lens, you can actually have a range on them as well. And some, as you can see here, will include a small tripod to help you steady the image. Now, telephoto lenses are more prone to camera shake. I'll speak about that in just a moment, how you can overcome that too. Now, when it comes to smartphone or telephoto lenses, the ranges are going to be from less than €10 or $10 all the way to $100 plus, and you can buy them Amazon, eBay, in your local camera shop. What I recommend is that if you're really into doing this type of photography, to spend the money on it. A lens that's going to cost you less than $10 is not going to be good. You pay for quality. Now, that said, a lens that's less than $10, €10 is still going to be useful, because maybe you're not ready to commit to spending a lot of money on a lens yet. You want to try it out, see what they're like first of all. Then you might go for those kind of lower priced ones. But then Moving up from there, you're going to be spending in and around €100. Now, the recommended brands when it comes to telephoto lenses, Moment, which we're going to talk about those in more in a second, Roida Black and Apexel Power. These are higher end smartphone lenses, but you will absolutely get much higher quality photographs from them as well. Now, a couple of other things to remember with our telephoto lenses: it means you're going to be much more zoomed in, so you're going to be able to get closer to your subject while maintaining a distance, but it leaves you with a much narrower angle of view. So you're going to be using these lenses for photographing animals that you can't get quite close to. What I also really recommend when using these telephoto lenses is that, and it's easier to do with smartphones, is to keep an awareness of what's happening outside of the frame. So, anticipate the action. If you're using a DSLR, you kind of have to keep both eyes open, one looking through the camera and one kind of looking around, which can be a tricky technique to master, but it's a lot easier to do it with a smartphone. Just making sure of what's happening around the frame. Obviously, they're great for portraits and shallow depths of field, which means they're great for doing wildlife, macro, and sports with that shallow depth of field. But you're going to struggle with them in low light cases. So if you're trying to do a little bit of night wildlife photography, that's where things are going to get very, very tricky, especially when using a telephoto lens. Now, you're going to have less light as well with these lenses because the aperture is higher. They use a higher f-stop because it's more zoomed in. So this is just simply down to the mechanics of the lens. The aperture is going to be smaller. It gives you a greater depth of field if you happen to be photographing landscapes, but you're going to have less light in that case, which again means you're going to need a longer shutter speed, which means you're more prone to camera shake. So they are a trickier lens to use, and they won't use as much megapixels on your image sensor if you're using an inbuilt telephoto lens. Do bear that in mind. So, for example, if you're doing a wide shot, you're going to get the maximum, count on your megapixels if you happen to be using, say, a 40 megapixel sensor, but you're going to have only perhaps about 8 megapixels if you're using a telephoto lens, an inbuilt telephoto lens, which means you don't have as much versatility to crop in on the photograph afterwards, or to print very, very large if you happen to be into printing. Those are things that you need to be very aware of. Now, if you're finding that you still cannot get close enough, it is possible to buy scope attachments for your smartphones, I should say. So typically scopes are used for bird watching. If you live anywhere near a beach or anything like that, you may have very well seen people out there using scopes to watch birds, but we can actually attach our phones to them as well. They range from 60 to 100 times zoom, so they're very powerful zoom ranges that we have on them. You can actually do a little bit of night sky watching them with them as well. Not as powerful as telescopes, but still good for looking at the moon too, if you were thinking about photographing the moon as well. You will definitely need a tripod with them because they're typically, you would set them down in one place and just take your time and just wait and watch nature as it's happening. They're available in most camera shops, so I'm talking about the scopes as well as the scope attachments. You can actually also buy binocular attachments as well that will allow you to attach your smartphone to it, but binoculars are not as powerful as scopes. They would have typically a zoom range from about 20 to 60 times optical zoom, and then 60 upwards is your scopes. Anything above that, then you're into your telescopes. So, spotting the scopes, I think, are good kind of mid-range. Scopes will be about €100 upwards, so you are paying for something that's a lot more advanced, with kind of high quality elements, glass inside of it too. So you are going to be looking from €100 upwards, and then the attachments won't cost much. They should cost about $10. If you are interested in these, I definitely recommend that you go to a local camera shop when you can, and check them out there too. But this will allow you, especially if you're into doing bird watching and bird photography, I strongly recommend that you have a look at investing in a spotting scope and an attachment with it as well. One thing that everybody should have is a Bluetooth remote, and I've mentioned these before. These are great for doing nighttime photography, but they're also great for wildlife photography, especially when patience is needed. So if you're going to be in a location for some time, I think it's a good idea to have one of these because it'll allow you to take a photograph, react quickly when you might try to press the phone to get the shot and then you miss the shot because it's trying to focus and so on. So Bluetooth remote would be a better one to go with. They're very affordable. You spend about $10 on them. Works on Bluetooth, unsurprisingly, and it'll allow you to set up your phone on a tripod. You can set it up in a location while you're waiting for the action to happen, while you're waiting to capture whatever animal it is you're trying to capture, and simply press the shutter when the action happens. Now, when I was talking about sharper telephoto shots earlier as well, a rule of thumb, and this goes for any telephoto lens, is that your shutter speed should at least match the focal length to ensure no camera shake. Now, this can be a little bit trickier when you're using telephoto lenses, as sometimes they may not display the equivalency of the focal length, the millimeters on the lens. But for example, if you had a 200mm lens, you should be setting your shutter speed to at least 200 of a second or faster. Anything less than that will risk camera shake. Now, this is obviously going to be a bit different if you happen to be using a tripod, but if you're not using a tripod, you need to try and keep your shutter speeds very fast to avoid camera shake, which means you're going to have to boost up your ISO. So you might find you'll have to just increase that ISO. Now, again, this is if you're photographing in fully manual mode. You should be keeping your shutter speeds nice and high to ensure that you don't get any camera shake in the shot. Now, with all of that in mind, let's have a look at some other steps that you can take to make sure that you have successful wildlife photography. And planning is everything, as I mentioned earlier. Research an area and the animals that live there, and if this is even just your local area, find out what kind of flora and fauna there is where you live. Be prepared for changing weather. So again, going to completely depend on where you live and the time of year and so on, but just make sure you have a look at weather reports. Bad days can still be used for practice, but you're going to get better photographs on sunny days. You'll just have better light. Make sure to carry a spare battery and memory cards as well. Just make sure you have enough memory, and you might want to bring a charger or a spare battery with you as well if you're planning on being out for a large part of the day and doing a lot of photography. Obviously, it's going to drain your battery. Spend time in one location. If you move around from place to place, you're giving yourself less chance of actually capturing animals. If you actually just wait and stay put, you'll probably see more things happen, and also animals will become more comfortable with you as well if you're kind of just staying there and they see that you're not a threat. And dress appropriately. Very much like I was saying about the changing weather, just make sure you're wearing the right clothes and the right gear, and be prepared to bring maybe something extra with you, like an extra pair of socks or something, just so that you keep your feet nice and dry. And of course, patience. Most successful photographers will spend weeks or months waiting for the perfect shot. So keep revisiting locations, keep going back, and you will eventually get that shot that you are after. Now, if you are planning on revisiting a place over and over, it might be worthwhile geotagging your photographs. So basically, this will attach coordinates to your shots. You can also then upload images with those coordinates so that you have a quick reference as to what's in that particular area. So it's great, like if you're visiting a location beforehand, you're trying to find some areas where you want to shoot, you take the photograph, you can geotag it so that you can quickly find it again, and you can also remember exactly what was there. You see it on Google Maps all the time. If you're looking at an area, you're thinking about going on holidays or anything like that, you see lots of people posting pictures up. That's effectively what geotagging is, and it's a really great way of planning. Again, entirely up to you if you want to do it. You may find it to be beneficial, especially if you're embarking on quite a big project when it comes to photographing wildlife. Now, when photographing wildlife, also really important to be aware of animal behavior. Think of yourself like you're a tracker because that's essentially what you're doing. Animals have routines and patterns. They are creatures of habit. So make sure if you're after a particular type of animal or particular type of bird, research what they eat, research what times they're active at, research, even research things like their lifespan. Research what time they might be mating, research, what times they might be, having their babies and so on as well. So you can, just study their behaviors, study how they live, so that you can maximize the time that you're going out to photograph them. Okay, and also think about the animals. Like if you're photographing, say you're photographing birds, think about the predators and that might prey on them as well, because they might not be active at the times that the predators are active and so on. So you really need to dig in and to do your research with everything to do about them, and it'll just really lead to more unique shots. So final thing then is, of course, as well to think about the times of activity. Make sure you're going at the right time. You don't want to be heading out, getting everything ready, everything else ready, and then you find out that all the animals are asleep. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing the time that you're going out at. This might mean that you have to go out very early in the morning when animals are out, because they know it's quiet and that there's no one around. So they get out there very early in the morning. They're generally not going to be too active during midday or afternoon when there's a lot of activity going on. And they might start emerging again at night. So again, when you're looking at animal behavior, you're definitely going to want to see what times they are most active at. And you're going to want to turn off the sound. Not really much else to say there. Turn off the sound if you have sound on the camera and it's possible to turn off the sound. Turn off the sound. Turn off all your notifications, your ringtones, all that kind of stuff. Just turn it all off and just concentrate on your photography. Now, so with all of that out of the way, let's actually go and take some photographs. So I just want to go through some different scenarios that you can try out yourself and how to approach them. So what I would recommend, if possible, if you have a back garden, is to start there. Now, if you haven't got a back garden, you can always go to your local park and try this as well. But observe local wildlife in your gardens, the birds that might be landing there. Depending on where you live in the world, you might get hedgehogs in your garden. I know certainly where I am, we live in an apartment complex, but there's lots of birds, there's lots of foxes and stuff like that as well. But if you have pets like cats and dogs, it might scare some of that local wildlife away. Again, pay attention to your times, like hedgehogs and that would definitely be more active very early in the morning. And if you're thinking about feeding these animals as well, just be very careful about what you're feeding them. If you get a bird feeder, make sure you're getting good quality food and seeds for them. Remember, with a bird feeder, then you might also attract squirrels, so think about them as well. But also just be sure to pay attention to the diets, like we can't give hedgehogs milk, for example. They're lactose intolerant, so you need to be sure that you're giving them something that isn't going to be harmful for them. You can also consider setting up a trigger system for nocturnal activity. Now, triggers are something much more advanced, but basically it's almost like a tripwire using lasers. I know it sounds very high tech, but that'll actually trigger the camera, the phone, to fire when something passes through it. But that's definitely something kind of beyond us at this stage. But do most importantly remember their safety as well, and of course your own. You don't want to be putting yourself in harm's way. Again, very much depending on the type of animals where you live. Now, moving up from there, you're going to be going to the forest. So again, you can try out parks if you've got this in mind, national parks, big parks, anything like that. It's going to be a lot less light than appears to your eyes. Okay, so this is something that I certainly found out kind of rapidly when I started my photography. Local park, photographing there, getting photographs of the squirrels. I was photographing on film at the time. All my pictures came out blurry, and I was like, why? And it's because there's much less light than appears to be to your eyes. So our cameras see light very differently, so make sure to adjust your ISO accordingly. If you do come across animals, be very quiet and move very slowly. If you're tracking animals, stay downwind so they don't pick up your scent. Think about the time of day you're photographing, visit a local park for practice. Just make sure you clean up after yourself. And if you are visiting national parks, again, depending on where you're living, don't stray from set paths where instructed. It's for your own safety and it's for their safety as well. So follow the rules. Now, you may have mixed feelings when it comes to zoos and especially with animals in captivity. I know I certainly have mixed feelings about them. Zoos can do some great work when it comes to conservation, especially when it comes to rarer animals. But obviously, then it goes against their nature when you're kind of putting these animals in captivity as well. And I think it also just comes down to the quality of the zoo too. Like for example, the zoo here in Dublin, from my own personal experience, I have actually worked with them. They are great. The staff there are brilliant, and they really care about the animals and how they're looked after. But unfortunately, it can really vary from country to country. But if you're planning on going to the zoo, just a couple of tips to remember. Try and choose a time of year that's good to go when there's less visitors so that you've got a bit more space and room to move around. Now, you can also pick times of the year when there might be events happening. So, like if animals are giving birth soon, or there's new animals being born, you're probably going to want to go and photograph them, but you're going to have bigger crowds. Similarly, if you're going at feeding time, very busy times during the day, you're going to be dealing with more crowds, so do be aware of that. Now, very important to remember as well, any photographs that you take of the animals, the zoos own the copyrights to their animals, so you can't go in there and photograph away, get these great shots of lions and tigers, etc., and then try to sell those photographs, because you are going to get yourself into legal trouble. So these will strictly be photographs for practice. And of course, as usual, when it comes to any kind of wildlife, take your time and be patient and try to isolate your subject. Try to photograph them with not too many distractions happening in the background. Urban wildlife. This is an area that I really enjoy when it comes to wildlife photography. If you're photographing typically at night, spend time in the area. Animals will become used to you. So if you happen to be revisiting the location over and over, animals will eventually find that you're not a threat. Remember your safety and theirs again. Look to areas where there's lots of food. So lots of animals now live off our waste, which is a horrible thing, but it's just the reality of the world. But particularly like foxes, they would be very active on the night when bins are put out. Don't influence an animal's behavior with food. So don't put food out for them, because they'll you can interrupt their behavior, their natural behavior, their natural instincts. They can come to rely on you for food as a food source. That's not something that you want to do. Because then if suddenly you go away, they're in trouble. So I really don't recommend. You just don't want to leave any kind of impact on them. And look for possible nests and dens during daylight hours, and then revisit them at night. But always remember to be very, very safe. Safari, very popular. You're definitely going to need to be using telephoto lenses here, and also pay attention to what the experts and guides are telling you. Safaris can be very busy, so think again about the time of year that you're going. Remember, lots of spare cards and batteries as well. As usual, try to focus on the eyes. And with this, I suppose you want to have anticipation. So again, safaris are bringing you around. They might try to bring you around at times of the day where animals are maybe a little bit more active and so on. But think about what might happen. Keep an eye out on what's going on and try to anticipate what might happen. Don't break any of the rules. Always stay within where the instructors are telling you, and the only rules you should be breaking are some photography ones. Going even more exotic than our safaris, we have our marine. So this one again is going to be you're probably going to be going on a trip to get these types of shots, but also see what you can see from the seashore. So if you're close to a beach or anything like that, go down and visit the beach, see if there's any kind of rock pools, anything like that, what kind of fish and fauna might be there. Even birds, seagulls, things like that as well. Take a boat trip to spot whales or dolphins. Again, you're going to be listening to the experts and guides there as well. And think about, mixing things up as well, changing your shutter speeds too. You can also buy rain covers to protect your phone. So you might consider investing in one of those. They're not too expensive at all, just to keep any kind of splashes or spray or anything like that off your phone. You can also go underwater too. So you can visit local aquariums, but just remember very poor lighting conditions in aquariums. I was in one nearly a year ago now at this stage, doing a little bit of work down in South Africa. There's one in Cape Town there, a really great one there as well. But it is really, really tricky to photograph in aquariums. So you need to take your time. Tripods may not be allowed, so you definitely want to check beforehand. If you're going diving, if you're someone who's really into diving, again, go with a group and listening closely to the instructor unless you're an experienced diver. Try to get in close, as water is going to reduce sharpness, light and contrast, especially the deeper down you're going, so you might need to use a flash. Now, it is possible to get underwater housing for your phones. Very expensive for deeper depths, but they're nowhere near as expensive as housing for DSLR. So this is actually an area where smartphones might be a better option to take for underwater photography, because it's much cheaper to get the housing for them. Loads of different brands out there. High quality ones are going to spend. You're going to be paying about $100 more. Always check the depth rating, how low you can actually go with them before they might be compromised. You can also get shallower ones for shallower depths too. If you're just going snorkeling, they are a lot less expensive. Now, just before we move away from wildlife photography, it's also very important to talk about conservation. So think about what to do with your photography. If you are really into your wildlife photography, there is a duty to preserve that wildlife as well. Think about how your photography can help when it comes to conservation. Think about local conservationists, how you might be able to help them out with your photography to help spread a message. Think about when you're posting on Instagram, the kind of tags that you're using as well to promote conservation and so on as well. Use your photography to help spread a message. Use it to highlight important issues. Now, moving away from our wildlife photography for now, first of all, let's just have a quick check at where we're at on our skills. So we've added a couple of more skills. We've filled out our skills a little bit more in this lesson, particularly when it comes to our vocabulary and our advanced skills. Not so much in terms of editing in this lesson, but we'll certainly be doing plenty of editing in upcoming lessons. And having a quick look at what's coming up in our next lesson, we're going to be talking all about a variety of subjects. We're going to be talking about city, street and travel photography. We'll also talk a little bit about documentary photography in this lesson as well, so kind of photojournalism and where that all kind of falls in it. So we're kind of going the extreme opposite here, away from our nature, away from our wildlife, and getting into the cities and looking at people and traveling the world as well, and how we can better photograph it. So do join me for that lesson. Now, I know we've already gone very far in this lesson, but just one final topic to go through is our macro wildlife photography. And this again, you're going to need some basic equipment, but first of all, I want to define what the difference between close-up and macro photography is. Okay, so close up is exactly what it sounds. It's taking a close up photograph of something. It's getting in closer to the subject and capturing it. Like this is a close up of a bird. Okay, you're filling the frame with this. You might be taking a close up of someone's face. Again, you're filling the frame, and that is not technically a macro shot, it's a close-up shot. Macro photography is when we enlarge the subject beyond its size. What macro actually means is large, it means big, it doesn't mean small. So if you're familiar with nutrition, you think about your macronutrients. These are your nutrients that you need to get a lot of, because that's what macro is. Macro photography is going beyond close-up photography and enlarging the subject beyond life size. Okay, and that's what's considered true macro. Like in this photograph here, the subject is clearly much larger than it would be in real life. So this is a macro shot. So this brings us on to our macro ratios. So there's different macro ratios that you will see sometimes when describing a photograph. And basically, when you see these kind of ratios like 1 to 3, 1 to 2, 1 to 1, or 5 to 1, or a variety of them, that's telling you what the magnification is on the subject. The first number represents how big the object appears on your camera sensor. The second number represents how large it is in real life. So macro ratio of 1 to 3 means that the subject is about a third of the size of what it is in real life on your image sensor. Okay, so we're getting into true macro when we go 1 to 1 or anything beyond that. So 1 to 1 means that we're representing the subject as the exact size that it is in real life on the medium, on the sensor. Okay, so that might sound a little bit confusing, but if you think about, say, if you ever did scale models, for example, like if you did Airfixes or anything like that, you might have been making an Airfix model that was 1/205th ratio of the life size of the object. Okay, so it was 250 times smaller than the life-sized version of that object. When we go beyond 1 to 1 ratio, we're then magnifying the subject beyond life size. So a 5 to 1 ratio means that the subject is now 5 times larger than it appears in real life. So we're getting into macro. Anything beyond 20 to 1 ratios, that's when we're getting into microscopic photography, which is a completely separate topic for another day. Okay, so that's just to define. If you ever hear someone talk about what it's a true macro shot, they're talking about a macro shot that's either 1 to 1 ratio or anything higher than that. So that is when the larger number appears first, or is equal to the second number. When it's the second number that's larger, that means it's a close-up rather than a macro photograph. Okay, so with that in mind, let's just quickly talk about our macro lenses again. These are essentially magnifiers for our lenses. They're designed to increase minimal focusing distance. That means how close you can actually get to the subject before the camera can no longer photograph or no longer focus. Like telephoto lenses, they'll come in different magnifications, but it doesn't measure, it's not an increase in focal length, it's an increase in the magnification. So 15 times macro lens will magnify your subject by 15 times. Okay, now with that in mind, I want to briefly talk about moment lenses. If you are after quality lenses when it comes to any type of the attachments we talked about, telephoto, portraits, macros, I would recommend you have a look at moment lenses. Now, we're not affiliated with any brand. We're not here, we don't sponsor any brand, or we're not sponsored by any brand. So this is a recommendation from me personally, that if you are after high quality lenses for your phones, definitely check out moment lenses. You are going to be paying in and around $100, €100 for them, but the quality is much, much higher. Now, a moment macro lens will only give you about 4 times magnification compared to some of the other ones out there, but what you're losing out in terms of magnification, you are definitely gaining in the quality. So it's just something to consider. It's also good idea to consider adding extra light when it comes to macro photography. So you can get these quick little attachments, as you can see here. These are continuous lights, means they're always on. They're not like a flash or like a strobe. And these can be very, very useful when you're struggling to get the exposure when it comes to macro photography. So we're going to talk a lot more about lighting in our studio photography lessons, but a good idea to think about them when it comes to our macro wildlife too. Now, one of the issues that you're going to encounter when it comes to macro photography is that sometimes you may not want to have such a shallow depth of field. Okay, you might want to have a really sharp photograph. That could be very, very difficult to achieve when it comes to macro photography because, as we've mentioned before, the closer we get to our subject, the smaller, the narrower, or the shallower, I should say, the depth of field becomes. And when we're photographing macro, we're always going to be very, very close to the subject, meaning that we're always going to have a very shallow depth of field. So what do you do then if you want to try and get a sharp photograph in the foreground to the background in a macro shot? Well, this is where we need to get inventive, and we need to use something that's what's known as focus stacking. So if we have a look at this example here, so both photographs, these are shot at the same exposure settings, the same distance, same depth of field. And as we can see in the image over here on the left, the background is a little bit out of focus. So the face in the background here is a little bit out of focus. You can also see it with text on the on this little trophy is a little bit out of focus as well. If we have a look at the image on the right, we've changed the focus, so the foreground is now no longer sharp. So we're now focusing on the mask on the back, the crying mask, which means now that our foreground is no longer sharp. That's because we're photographing so close to the subject. So the only way that we can get a sharp image is to combine both of the photographs together to get one complete image, what's known as a focus stacked photograph. So shot at the same settings, the same distance, focus starting at the front, moving to the back, and at least two different points should be combined. You'll definitely need to use manual focus for this as well, and then you can combine them together. Now we'll have a look at how to combine those together in later lessons, and it can also be used for landscape photography. So if you're finding that you want to get sharper landscapes, you can actually use this technique as well for landscape photography too. So that is focus stacking, and that's how you can get really sharp macro photographs. If you're struggling with that really shallow depth of field. Now, we'll look at softwares later on, but Heliocon and Zarine, these are two softwares you can check out. You will have to pay for those, however, and it is also possible to do it in Photoshop, more advanced versions of Photoshop. But again, we'll be looking at those when the time is right. Now, with that in mind, let's have a look at some macro subjects that you can photograph and the approaches that you can take to them as well. So starting off with insects, perhaps the most fun thing to photograph when it comes to macro photography, but also the trickiest ones to photograph. You want to move slowly when you're photographing. Of course, you don't want to scare those insects away. You can attract insects with water, flowers, or minerals. So, for example, if you were to put, say, a little bit of sugar water out, you'll probably attract some insects for sure. That's a really good idea if you're also want to photograph bees. Sugar water is good for them to kind of keep their energy up. So you could put that out, leave it out, and just wait for a while. You can attract them with flowers as well. Some insects will bask and rest in sunlight. So, they in very intense sunlight, midday sun, they might just take it easy and recharge their batteries and wait for it to be a little bit cooler. Some other insects will also move slower when it's cooler. So you might find that in the evening or in the morning that they're moving a little bit slower, making it easier for you to photograph them. Different insects, of course, like wildlife, they're active at different times of the day. So again, you want to do your research. And you can also collect specimens. So, a lot of macro photographers will do that. They will actually collect, spiders, they might collect small insects and that. But of course, you want to look after them. So again, do your research. Make sure you know how to care for them properly if you are going down that route. And always respect nature. And be safe as well, of course, especially if you're dealing with bees or anything like that can end up stinging you, or wasps or hornets or anything. Make sure you are taking the right precautions. You can use macro or close up when it comes to people as well. So the small details on people are unique. It's great to capture them. If you are photographing eyes, avoid using the flash, but you might use that light that we spoke about a little bit earlier on. You can get a nice catch light. So for example, in this shot here, we can see that there's a window being used here in the eye. That creates what's called a catch light, and is quite nice, can be very, very desirable look in the eyes. Be mindful of as well, of course, if you're getting in close and photographing somebody, that they're comfortable with you doing that. So communicate with them, tell them what you're doing, make sure that they're okay with it. Photographing flowers, of course, a hugely popular area when it comes to macro, and it's great because they're easy to practice with, easy to photograph at any time of the day. So they're a great way to practice your macro photography, and of course they look great. You can experiment with your angles here then, because you're photographing a stationary subject, some subject that's not moving. So take your time, think about how you use the color of the flower as well, think about the background that you're photographing them against too. Add some droplets of water. You can get like one of these little mist sprays. You can add a little bit of water to them, or you can photograph after the rain, which is a great time to photograph. It's like the air has been cleaned after a rainfall. And try photograph through their life cycle. So if you buy some plants, you buy some flowers in your local market, you might try to photograph them from a bud to the end of their lives, and great kind of series of photograph over their lifespan. And shoot some still lives at home with flowers. So we're at the time of recording, we're all stuck inside at the moment, so it's a great thing to photograph. With light coming through the window, you can set up a nice still life for yourself using your window as a light source. Macro photography also allows for great abstract photography as well. Think about textures, think about shapes. Like we spoke about in our black and white lesson, everyday objects can become extraordinary, and add a little bit of mystery to them as well when we get in very, very close to them. Think about using black and white as well when it comes to your abstract photography, and look at natural objects with your abstracts. Shoot like the texture of a piece of fruit, anything like that can really, really be fascinating when photographed closely. Mechanical objects as well, anything with say gears on it, or how mechanics work and piece together, great for macro photography too. And again, consider your background, try and keep things nice and free from having too many distractions. Finally, I know it's a lot that we've covered in this lesson, but you can get very creative with your macro photography to have some fun with miniatures and toys, like in this shot here, this little toy breaking over a pistachio nut. Lego is great for macro, or anything like Lego if you're into collecting that. You can set up nice little scenes for yourselves, get your children involved in as well. Make it fun for them, set up little scenes, and get them involved too. Again, something great to do if you're stuck indoors at the moment with children. Create stories with your macro photography, get creative with them, and create little narratives with your photographs as well, and try to imagine yourself interacting with this giant world. So make yourself small and think about interacting with this huge world around you when you're getting creative with your macro shots. And think about colored card for backgrounds. So again, we speak about keeping your backgrounds not distracting, not too overwhelmed. You might just place little bits of colored card in the background as well to keep things nice and playful and colourful too. Now, so that's the end of a very long lesson, but I do hope that you enjoyed it. Our next lesson, we're going to be talking all about street, city and travel photography. We'll also dabble a little bit in documentary style photography as well. So a really fun lesson. I had a really fun time putting this one together for you. So well done on completing lesson number 3. Feel free to send us suggestions at support@shawacademy.com. As always, challenge, I'd like you to take 2 photographs for this challenge, to do a wildlife photograph and to do a macro shot. Now, of course, a wildlife photograph can be, a photograph of your pets, photograph of local birds, anything like that. Just some kind of wildlife shot, a shot with some type of animal in it. And a macro photograph. And a macro shot, it doesn't have to be a macro wildlife shot. If you want to photograph insects, absolutely go ahead and do that. But if you want to photograph something like flowers or something more abstract, like we were speaking about a little bit earlier on in the lessons, please go ahead and do so and use the Shaw Smart Photo hashtag as always. So that is the end of our lesson number 3. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I'll see you all back here again very, very soon for lesson number 4 in module 2. We're taking ourselves to the streets. So until then, look after yourselves. Bye bye.